Welcome to Friday Friends, RI Elder Info's weekly look at the organizations and individuals providing resources for Rhode Island seniors, caregivers, and professionals.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. It is 9 o'clock on Friday, and you are watching me, Deb Burton, Executive Director of RI Elder Info, and your weekly host for Friday Friends, where I bring you information that you or someone you know needs to know about. So please make sure you hit the like button, the share button, the bells, the whistles, the follows, all those cues that say you need to check this out. Because today's topic is something that applies to a whole lot of folks out there, maybe even for you yourself. So make sure that you stay tuned because it's an important topic and we're going to make it as fun and as engaging as we can, but it is something that is so applicable to so many of us. It's really important that you help us get the word out. Now, as you all know, we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and we could not bring you this information every week without the support of our sponsors. So big thank you to Point 32 Health Foundation, United Healthcare, and especially McCarthy Law. Here's a message from McCarthy Law.
Here at McCarthy Law, we practice in the areas of estate planning, long-term care planning, elder care law, and residential real estate. Our focus is really on providing peace of mind to our clients.
If you're interested in scheduling a consultation with our office, you can feel free to reach out to us at 401-541-5540. You can also reach out via website at www.mccarthylawri.com. You also should check out our social media, both on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for some helpful tips and tricks.
Welcome, Samantha. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I am so glad to have you on today to talk about the estate planning for blended families. You know, so often I hear my mom's husband, my dad's wife, and I think, ooh, strap on the helmet, secure the seatbelt. What can make it easier?
Yeah, family dynamics are so complex, and it's so common to have blended families now. I myself, have a blended family with his, mine, ours, and so there's so many conversations that need to be had, both as you're aging and then when you are older and looking at more long-term care issues. And you don't know what you don't know, so people just often don't know what to ask.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that those blended families should think about? And are there like particular stages in life when certain conversations should be had?
Sure. I mean, I think as far as when in life the conversation should be had, when you blend your family is a good time to start the conversation, whether you're younger or older. Unfortunately, in doing what I do, we see that anything can happen at any time, right? We don't have a crystal ball. Nobody knows how long they have before death or a serious health crisis. And so putting some sort of plan together is important. But even before the planning, just start having the conversations, amongst the adults. And then if you have adult children, kind of sharing with them. One of the difficulties we see is the conversations are hard, and sometimes a couple can't come to an answer, and so they just put it off and put it off and put it off and do nothing. And then we have a health crisis, and now we have no plan, and it becomes difficult.
I think it becomes, for most people, if something makes us uncomfortable, it becomes really easy to put it off, whether it is having our conversations about who gets what, who makes decisions about what, or even something maybe so simple as, I'm afraid of dentists, so I avoid making, my appointment to go to the dentist. But when it comes to estate planning and caring for what happens as a couple as you get older and you need more care, what are ways to kind of get those conversations started?
Yeah, so we actually have a checklist that we kind of walk people through in order to help them make the decisions. But starting at a fundamental level, we've talked on this podcast before about powers of attorney, finances, and healthcare. Like, that's a really good place to start. So, if your spouse would be your primary decision maker for finances and healthcare, how would your adult children feel about that? Is it maybe a situation where you want to put your spouse, who also is aging, and an adult child as co-agents? Do you name your child as alternates? And then when it comes to finances, especially if we're commingling assets in a blended family, it's a common scenario where, maybe two people are married and they each have two adult children. We might put one adult child from each family as a co-agent so that there's a checks and balances. So everybody feels like there's transparency and everybody knows what's going on. And that can be helpful. But the other part of the conversation is everything commingled and should it be commingled? And I think, there's different schools of thought in that regard. But when we look at long-term care concerns, it becomes a big issue for blended families who've maybe kept everything separate because of often the fact that they want their own biological children to inherit their stuff. Well, now if we need long-term care, all of your assets for both of you are considered available. And so that's something that people don't necessarily understand because they think if they keep things separate, that they stay separate. And then people don't talk about. And so then we have hurt feelings and anger and things where we could certainly address these things from a planning perspective and also just like a family conversation perspective in advance of the need for care, in the advance of a crisis. And it really helps, to make sure people can get the care they need. We can protect what we can protect, but above all, I think preservation of family harmony. As a mom of four, I say, estate planning is a gift to your next generation. And really the goal of doing estate planning as a parent is to preserve that family harmony when you're gone and what you've worked so hard for. And when
I love that phrase, preserve family harmony. That is a wonderful way to phrase it.
It is. And, even blended families, you might not be biological, but depending on when your family blended, very often we see our clients' children, even their adults, have strong relationships. And their grandchildren have relationships, amongst that blended family. And so it really is an opportunity to have these conversations, although sometimes hard and things we don't want to talk about. But take it like in bite-sized pieces, one thing at a time. Who's going to manage our healthcare decisions if, we can't do that for ourselves? And what does that look like? And let's just spend the next month thinking about that. And then let's move on to the next thing on the line.
Yeah, especially if it's a situation where if I am the child as an adult and I think, I don't like my dad's wife and she moved into our house. And if he dies, then she's going to get my mom's china. And now all of a sudden it becomes very, very heated, personal, and a lot harder to speak with cool heads in that moment when dad is sick.
And I think that personal property stuff is one big thing that you can address in a fairly simple way by saying who gets what, or even dividing those things up as you age when you no longer necessarily have a need for them. Because those are the things we see people fight about a lot, or maybe the things that don't necessarily have significant value financially, but they do have sentimental value. I think that's important. It's also really important, like in that scenario you just described, there's a way to provide for a new spouse for the rest of their life that still sets up your adult children for success, such that they're not losing everything because that spouse now exists. And sometimes that alone helps the relationship too. And
one of the things that I think sometimes happens, and I'm a romantic, I like to believe in love. There are some folks out there that are super shady and are trying to create these relationships to marry an individual. Maybe they're a recent widow and they're older, and all of a sudden, this basically scam artist comes in and, treats my parent like they're the best thing since sliced bread and start saying, well, sign everything over to me. Are there ways that an older adult can protect their assets so that if their genuine intention is to pass down their items to their loved ones or to their nonprofit that they love, things like that, if there is one of those bad actors that comes in, that the older adult is still protected?
Yeah, I mean, at a simple level, powers of attorney come into play, but they don't remove the older adult's ability to make decisions. And so if we have cognitive decline or someone kind of schmoozing them and they're making some bad decisions, that's difficult because they, as an adult, still have the right to make decisions, including bad ones. So this is often a scenario where we do trust planning with maybe an adult child as the only trustee or as a co-trustee, because there is then a checks and balances legally and an obligation to manage things for the best interest of the senior, which doesn't necessarily include the best interest of the swindler. Because unfortunately, the scenario you explained is a very common one, and I hate to say it and I hate to see it, but sometimes people, it might be as simple as someone who's offering to help. Let me take them to church. Let me take them to get groceries. Let me provide them a little bit of assistance in their home, and then they just slowly work their way in. And so it usually happens over time in a way that you're not necessarily having the red flags raised immediately. And so you don't know. And so I think part of it too is if you're at a point where you are aging and you have adult children who you trust, who are financially stable, get them involved in the conversations. Make sure they know where your stuff is at. What do you have? What are your normal expenditures? A lot of times too, you just don't want to pay your bills as you age, right? Not that you don't want your bills to be paid. You just don't want to be the one dealing with it and dealing with that stress. And many adult children take over some of those day-to-day life tasks for their senior parents so they can just really relax and enjoy life. And that's a good way to do it too, because then there is someone overseeing what's happening. And so if there are, large transactions that aren't normal, big cash withdrawals, big gifts, things like that, we would know about that much sooner.
That's good. It's also important that even if you do have your kids, helping or someone helping you with those finances, to review your financial documents. But I don't know. I think a lot of folks know that I was having some difficulty with cell phone service when I was here in the office and I had to go deal with cell phone provider. Boy, I would have loved if somebody could have taken that task out of my hands.
I mean, that's so true. And there's so much that's done online and so much tech that not all seniors are tech savvy and want to be. And that is okay. But then you need someone who you trust who can do those things for you. And I do sometimes feel like that's where these swindlers kind of come in. They say, oh, well, I can do this for you online. I can do all these things that you've never done before that make your life easier. And suddenly they've wiped you of your life savings. So
exactly. Yeah, just give me your banking information and I can pay all your bills online. Yes. And unfortunately, it can happen with family members as well. And I feel like sometimes adult children may make bad choices / illegal choices where it's, well, I don't care if my mom is married to this guy and it's a joint checking. I have control over her and I'm going to, wipe out the money. But you can't do that. It's illegal.
Not an uncommon scenario, right? But yes, you have a fiduciary obligation to manage things in the best interest of your senior. And luckily there are some resources in this state. And again, if you have one child, it becomes more difficult because if they're pulling the wool over your eyes, there might not be someone saying, hey, this is what's going on. And the parent is maybe afraid to lose that relationship. But if there is more than one child who is stable and financially sound, all the more reason to have this be family conversations. You may have one child who is better at managing finances, who takes the lead, but if the other one is still getting statements or sees what's going on, or you're having a quarterly or annual or whatever the case may be, meeting as a family to review what's going on and where have things gone and what are our additional needs that have increased over the year, it's a good way to keep sight of what's going on. There also, if there is that financial concern about someone mismanaging and taking money from a senior, the Attorney General's office, their elder abuse unit is fantastic. And so that is a very good resource for Rhode Islanders to reach out to if they do feel like something is going on.
Absolutely. And it's, the AG's office, their team is amazing. Mm-hmm. So say we're part of a blended family and we're making an appointment to do our estate planning. What should we bring with us? What should we prepare for? What documents should we gather before we come in to see you?
Yeah, so two parts to that answer. First of all, we need to know, what do you have? So what are your bank accounts? What are your retirement accounts? Where are they at and how are they titled, as well as who are the beneficiaries of different accounts? So if you have a checking account, does it have a joint owner? Does it have a beneficiary designated? Is it just yours and you say, well, it's my account, but actually your spouse is the joint owner, or it's not, and nobody's listed as the beneficiary? Because those things are going to help us determine what happens if you pass, what happens if you become ill and need care. So list of all of the different accounts that you have of the various types, as well as real estate. So what real estate do you own? How is title held? Because then we can talk through how you have things right now. What happens if you do nothing? What are your options? And then what's your best case scenario? The other thing to know when you're thinking about estate planning as a blended family is if both spouses do not have the same intentions and the same goals, you might need separate attorneys. So you have to definitely look at that very closely and say, well, even though we've come together and we might have our separate children, maybe we have separate and joint children, do we both have the ultimate intention that everything is shared equally? Or it's not, but we all want the same thing. And if not, sometimes it's best that you use separate people to make sure both of your wishes are accomplished. And those two attorneys can certainly work together to make sure the plans are talking to each other in the right way. But one of the biggest things we see with blended families is they put off the conversation and they don't do anything. And then one spouse passes. And now their children are getting nothing if everything is set up to go to the surviving spouse. If we end up in probate, there are, different options for a surviving spouse to get something and the children not to lose everything. But if you've done planning and you have beneficiaries and you have joint accounts, which is the case for many spouses, that we're not in probate until the second spouse dies, likely that first spouse to pass, their children are not going to get anything, and they'll be completely disinherited unless the surviving spouse is honoring the wishes.
And that will be a big surprise for, unfortunately, too many people. Now, in these blended families, husband and wife, they, everybody's got good relationships, but then one of them becomes ill and requires the need to go to a nursing home and reside there permanently. Are there ways to protect assets so that the individual might be eligible to qualify for Medicaid? Can you do that with a blended family where, maybe each spouse came into the marriage with their own separate assets?
Yeah. Usually all of the assets of both spouses are considered available to pay for care. Now, there are exceptions to that, like retirement accounts. There also is a Medicaid planning strategy called spousal refusal, which we will sometimes use in these scenarios. There are also times where people get divorced when they're facing this scenario to make sure that everything is not commingled, and it's not a divorce for lack of love, but it's a divorce for practical purposes. And so there are options, and I think the best thing you can do is have the conversation. If you're in advance of that need, the best thing you can do is make a plan in advance so that we aren't losing everything. We don't have to get divorced. We don't have to go through some complex planning for the spouse to refuse and potentially not have Medicaid accept that. And we can still make sure assets are protected. You're going to get the care you need, and we're going to provide for the people that are important to you.
Which makes it all the more important to plan ahead, plan early, talk often. And if you have a diagnosis of something that's going to progress, like a dementia or a Parkinson's or an ALS, that conversation around planning comes way sooner than later.
Absolutely. And if you have that conversation sooner, again, even though they're hard conversations, so is getting that diagnosis, right? But if you have the conversation at the beginning, you are allowed to have autonomy and have a say in what's happening to you. Because what happens is if you don't have the conversation, you reach a point where you no longer can make those decisions, and then someone else is making them for you. And hopefully that's someone who does have your best interest at heart. But as we've talked about, you never know. And so I think autonomy to make decisions and be an active participant in what's going to happen to you and your stuff and your finances and your family is super important. And so that's something you can do even when you have a diagnosis, as long as you don't avoid the conversation.
I think that's the important thing, is have that conversation, and having those conversations initially. That's something that you can do and help families with. But then as those conversations maybe need to be revisited, you have someone in your office who can help with that too, right?
We do, yeah. So we have legal team, and then we also have an elder care coordination team. And so they're helping on the end of having some of the family conversations that maybe need some mediation and some guidance, and also making sure we're revisiting things as they change, because finances might not change significantly other than paying for care, but care needs often progress and change a lot. And so having this interdisciplinary approach where we can manage the care side as well as the legal side really allows us to make sure our clients are protecting what they have, getting the care that they need in the way that, again, preserves their autonomy and their quality of life as much as possible as they're aging.
Yeah, this is a wonderful conversation because I feel like it really does apply to so many families and so many older adults. And it's so nuanced as well. So yeah, this has been wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's such an important thing. And again, I mean, blended families are near and dear to my heart. It's such a common scenario. I mean, if I had to guess off the top of my head, at least half of our families are a blended family at this point. It's just a very common thing. And so, it's nothing to be ashamed of or afraid of. You just got to have the conversations and walk through the steps that are not unlike what any unblended blended family also needs to discuss. There's just a couple more nuances.
Absolutely. Well, Samantha, I'm glad that you took the time to come on today. This has been a great conversation that is so important.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. So happy to be here.
Absolutely. Everybody, every family is a little bit different, but like Samantha said, if you want to retain your autonomy or your independence, your ability to have a say in what is happening, it's important that you talk early, talk often, and officially plan, not scratching on the back of a napkin. You want to make an official plan. Samantha McCarthy and McCarthy Law can certainly help you with that. And they also have their care navigation team that can provide those enhanced mediation when sometimes those conversations are a little bumpy. They feel a little prickly to have, but there's folks out there who can help. And it's important that you have those conversations sooner rather than later, particularly if you have a diagnosis for an illness that will progress. You want to make sure everything that you want is honored. Well, folks, I'm glad that you were able to join me today. I look forward to seeing you all again next week. In the meantime, be well and be kind.